All right, next up we have Mr. Tony Jones.
Uh-oh.
Dun dun dun.
Dr. Jones.
What's up?
Yo, how's it going, Tony?
It's going
You got a bunch of 30 claps without doing anything. I've been on here like 3.5 hours and I have 268.
Can you clap for yourself? Doesn't look like it. Dang.
Oh man. Well, so Tony, for those of you who do not know, is an author. He's a teacher. He's a practical theologian, and among other things, is now the editor of the Theology for the People series at Fortress Press, which makes him Tripp's editor in this capacity. And oh my, we've been joined by a furry friend as well.
This is Albert.
Albert, what's a 3 to 5 line bio about Albert?
He will be hunting ducks tomorrow night in North Dakota.
Very nice.
That's what you need to know about him. All right,
Awesome.
go on.
So, Tony, as I've been, interacting with Tripp's book, I'm curious, you being the editor, how bad was it at first?
When Tripp was talking to Teresa about if I could have written a longer book, blah, 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 blah. Anybody who knows Tripp knows that he has no trouble concocting words. Talking for he talks talking for 9 hours is such a labor of love. You can't shut this kid up. So, it took some work. There's some back and forth. I'm a pretty tough editor. So, Tripp did his work. He did the hard work.
Gotcha. Tripp, do you have a stunt double now?
Oh, no, Tim's here.
Oh, Tim.
What up, friends?
Hey, Tim.
How you doing?
Just fine.
Oh, yeah. So Tony was the first
Tim also helped edit. Tripp needed multiple editors, put it that way.
It takes a village.
I'm just saying North Carolina public schools maybe should spend a little more time on English.
Wow.
Hashtag Oxford comma.
Look, Oxford comma is a real debate because I used to use it all the time, and then I got just creamed for it early on in grad school, so I stopped doing it.
You should also have not gone to grad school in North Carolina.
It's hard to keep up
grammatical issues.
It's hard to keep up with regional differences.
Don't do North Carolina. I'm getting many claps for that. I'm assuming it's not from Duke or UNC fans or Wake Forest.
Oh man.
Oh my. Now, Mike, you probably want to direct this, otherwise it could just
Hey,
be.
Tripp, I've got a question for you.
All right.
Jesus behind me is walking on water. I'd like you to tell me by what properties of physics do you think Jesus walked on water?
What properties of physics?
Yeah, how did that happen?
I don't think Jesus walked on water.
Think that's just a story?
No, I don't think it's just a story. Just a story is one of those ways that progressive Christians end up dismissing something of significant importance. But the reason around nature miracles being problematic is around the problem of evil. When divine power can invade, intervene, and determine natural things, it kind of puts God on the hook for cancer, for all sorts of times that people have drowned and wish they had had this special Jesus's daddy juice to walk on the water. And so it really is a problem of evil that makes me think about divine action to articulate and argue for an understanding of divine action that doesn't include this kind of God acting by divine intervention. That is a philosophical and metaphysical line of argument. But God's presence in and action in the world is developed Christologically.
So why would God be so careless as to allow, a misleading story that kind of backhandedly maligns God's character into the text?
All right. Given that divine intervention is what I'm rejecting, I'm not sure it would be sheer carelessness that things get into the text or tradition that are less than perfectly revealing the reality of God. And the other part about it is the Christian affirmation of the incarnation has is unrelated to any single one miracle, and the affirmation of the resurrection is an affirmation of an event that isn't historical in the proper category. So a lot of times when we're debating like walking on water or whatever and what those things look like, people assume that up for grabs is something like the incarnation and resurrection. And I think theologically, the difference between those two couldn't be more vast.
Okay. The bigger question, I think, is a hermeneutical question. And that is, who do you think is the intended author of the Gospels? Come on, riff on that for a while, Mr.
Not the intended audience, but the intended author?
Okay, well, I actually think this is important, and I joke about it in the book, that the Gospels are pushbacks to all sorts of rampant assumptions from the 19th century. That the Gospels are really this amazing source to get back to a historical Jesus that we could then use as a cleaver against the church and its doctrine. It's like, yeah, kind of. But everything you're reading are from a bunch of people that think God raised the homeless dead Jew, and that's why they're even telling the story. Part of the hermeneutical awareness is to see that the Gospels are not a kind of direct report. They're testimony narratives. They're witnesses to the presence of the risen Christ in the community. One of the things I liked about the book, I mean, I liked a lot of it, but one of the things no one's brought up thus far, and I never even heard what Tony thought about it, is my argument for a rather inclusive theological diversity of the church precisely from canon. That in the early church, this harmony gospel of Tatian, where you work out all the kinks, like in John, Jesus clears the temple at the beginning, the other three, the end. Tatian's like, he did it twice. Tell the Sermon on the Mount and Sermon on the Plain near each other, but he told them twice. There's not one version that's kind of getting reported different. And the church rejects this harmony gospel and then puts into canon 4 divergent and differing testimonies to the risen Christ by telling the story of Jesus. And in them, you have different Christologies, right? The Gospel of Mark, you identify the person of Jesus with God at the baptism. In Romans, Paul identifies it through the resurrection. In Matthew and Luke, it's through the conception. In John, it's a Logos Christology. When we take all this diversity of Christologies in the New Testament and say the answer is Trinity, we're doing hermeneutical violence to the New Testament. And what we're doing is becoming Tatianites with a imperial sanctioned Christological key, namely the creeds, as opposed to recognizing that the New Testament pushes against our desire for sameness when it goes to our testimonies and Christological reflections.
Okay. You're getting way too many claps here because you were sitting at 300 for a while, and I thought at 74 with about 5 minutes left, I could probably hit 300.
All right. Well, I will start clicking, and I want to know what you thought about canon as.
I don't think I really actually read that part of the book. No, I'll tell you what I remember is in when you're in seminary and you have to buy the gospel parallels, the synopsis, quatuor, evangelium or whatever. I forget the Latin, and I remember buying that book in seminary, and when you flip through it and you see the 4 gospels running in parallel and seeing the places where they overlap and the places where there's John will have something and then all 3 synoptics are totally white, like just empty columns, and then there's John, and then vice versa. Of course, I think those conflicts and contradictions in those stories that are told twice or thrice in the Gospels differently have been a big challenge for a lot of people. I guess even back then, I did not find it that challenging, though I do remember going to the Fuller Seminary Library and finding Tatian's Harmonized Gospel and checking it out. And, it had it had color codings for each gospel and how it was put together. So if it was in purple, it was from Mark or whatever. I think all those, one thing I like about your book is that I encourage all nonfiction writers to write like this, is that it builds a conflict, it builds a narrative. So in a lot of nonfiction books, you read the first chapter and you get the whole book, right? And then it's 7 more chapters of this, the author working out the same idea 7 different ways, saying the same thing 8 different times. And I like in your book that you did really work at building an argument over the course of, 45,000 words and over those chapters. And I like the fact that it fits in your back pocket.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus.
And if you order it before the end of the day on the 8th, you can get a whole stack of free high gravity classes with me, Peter Rollins, me and Philip Clayton. So you can put it in your back pocket, never read it, and just listen to the classes on your iPad. And
you make your money right there. For what?
Boom, shakalaka.
Yeah.
I'll also say that it didn't initially fit in your back pocket. So
did you have to trim down the margins, or?
That's one way to say it.
We had to trim Tripp. And that's not the only time I've had to trim Tripp.
Oh my.
His beard, people. Come on. Jeez.
Oh, okay.
We're losing viewers by the second.
Well, one of the things that I was wondering, Tony, is how did you like the atonement work in it? I mean, you have a whole book on why God killed Jesus.
Well, I thought you'd never mention it. Here it is. 2 minutes left. Mike mentioned everybody else's book in their intro, but forgot mine.
Oh, man.
Boo-hoo. I'm sure
like it out to atone.
I'm sure he'll tweet out a link to it now for sure. Yeah, I think you and I agree a lot on the atonement. I'm pretty processy in where I land the plane in that book. I think you and I both have similar criticisms of the payment model of the atonement. So yeah, I mean, I think you and I are pretty much on the same page. And you just spent last night talking about Jurgi Multi.
Oh yeah,
that's some killer atonement right there. Hashtag pun intended.
Well, one of the things that came up in the Crucified God discussion I did last night, the Homebrewed community group, we have a reading group called Epic Reads, and Philip Clayton and I do read through books together, and then everyone that's in the group gets on and we all talk and have a little hoorah. Reading Crucified God again, I read it and then realized how much more Moltmann was in my book than I thought was. Right? Like I thought I brought him up in 2 very specific places to make a point. And then I realized that chapter 6 in the Crucified God is one of the most influential chapters in my head. And I even realized in it that he does a appropriation and modification of Whitehead's critique of the doctrine of God through Western civilization. And I end up doing the same thing without deciding in a random footnote that process theology doesn't lead to a real Christology.
He wormed his way into your head, bro.
I know, it's very dangerous.
And I'll just say before I go that any listeners or viewers who are coming to the American Academy of Religion, they should bring their old tattered copy of Crucified God, and they can get Moltmann to sign it in the Fortress Press booth, and then they can buy the new 40th anniversary edition with a new intro forward by Miroslav Volf. And maybe they can get Moltmann to sign your book too, dude.
Yeah, well, here's the most important thing is who doesn't want a pint glass with Moltmann's cartoon head on the Homebrewed Christianity monk to drink dark German lager while we talk to him about the Crucified God.
Have you named it yet?
No, it gets revealed then. I can't tell Blab. If Blab knows, but if anyone on the side guesses the dark German lager name for Moltmann's 40th anniversary of Crucified God beer name, then I will mail you a copy of the book and Tony's book. That's right. You'll get both of them if you can guess the name.
All right.
It's very nerdy. You'll have to think of notions in the Crucified God that are funny and turn them into beer names, namely a rich, malty, dark German lager.
Love it. All right.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Tony.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Totally.
Peace.